Here.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Here.
President McClellan.
That's me. I'm here.
And our other two board members are absent.
So we have a quorum. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Taking a look at tonight's agenda, any additions or corrections to the agenda?
President McClellan, yes, and Board of Education members. On the second page of the handout that we provided you this evening, we have 3 corrections to salaries that are listed, one for Arlene Piper, Bethany Triplett, and Christina Vincent. So the corrections are noted in the agenda.
Oh, okay. With those corrections, could I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Kalinowski, Mr. Newmoff. Roll call, please.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes, agenda is approved. That brings us to discussion items and the first reading of the 5-year forecast. Ms. Jenkins.
Good evening. So it is that time once again to do the 5-year forecast. Just to do some background. The initial 5-year forecast has to be submitted by October 31st to the Ohio Department of Education. This deadline is actually going to change next year. There was a new bill that was passed that was not signed in time by the governor to make it this year, but next year the deadline will actually be November 30th. I don't know whether I will or won't change when we do it because we have our information, we can put it together, we can get it filed by October 30th. The reason that they changed the deadline was really so that if people had a levy on the ballot, they would know by November 30th whether it passed or not. So you weren't passing one October 31st and then resubmitting it if you passed or failed that levy. Then we have to update the forecast and file it between April 1 and May 31st each year. So we'll be doing that again. Those dates don't change. Anytime there's a material change to the forecast, you have to refile it, and then you can resubmit it anytime. So, every year I kind of talk to you guys about this and tell you that this thing changes the minute we get it done. So if we have some major change that we want to implement, we can put it in and redo it, refile it. Everything that we do in the district is driven by our statement of purpose, and that is to create a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and developmental outcomes for each student. That includes those things that impact the 5-year forecast. So that is the driver. I can tell you I sit in a lot of Superintendent Sawyer's meetings with his staff and administrators, and that is always students first, what's the outcome, how does this help us with our statement of purpose. So that is really what goes into this 5-year forecast. So first we'll do a little bit of a reminder, go back to fiscal 18 and how we ended. We talked about this as part of the June financials, but just as a refresher, revenue, we had just over $3 million more in revenue than we had anticipated. A portion of that is going to be ongoing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Total expenditures were reduced by $4.1 million. Again, we had talked about this. The majority of that was in salaries and benefits. And the majority of that also is going to be ongoing. Those two items, the revenue and the expenditures, actually helped us so that we were able to transfer $6 million into the Permanent Improvement Fund to put money aside for those things that will not be covered by the permanent improvement levy that we passed. Because if you remember, we passed it knowing that the general fund would still have to pay about $1.3 million each year. So this helps us kind of put that money back and work on some things that we otherwise maybe wouldn't be able to. So once we make that transfer, we actually had a positive variance in last fiscal year of about $817,000 in the forecast ending cash balance, which then that would compound and go through the rest of the years. So Mr. Darrow had asked, how far back did we have 5-year forecasts? Well, I actually found one that goes back to 1996. In that year, there were 951 students, and they had a budget of roughly $6 million. Fast forward to fiscal 18. What I thought I would do is kind of take a look back at the first forecast that I would have done that had fiscal 18 in it to see what did we project over those years, how did it change, and then where did we end. So in October of 2014, we projected fiscal 18, so the year we just finished, to be about $68.3 million in expenditures. Then the next year, October of 2015, we had increases, some staffing increases, so it went up to $71.9 million. That's also the time that we failed that levy. We were on the ballot in May of 2014. We failed the levy, so we would have implemented all of those cuts. We cut about $8 million. So then when you look at the October forecast for fiscal year 18, it dropped down to $59.9 million. Then we also then started implementing the board CIP goal to reduce our current year expenditures. So we didn't have quite the increase that we would normally have had, $60.8 million in October of 17, October of 18, which would have been October 2017 for the fiscal 18 year. $61.9 million was what we had anticipated for that year. We actually ended at $55.8 million. So you can kind of see the variances that can happen, the things that impact a 5-year forecast. And so when we're looking out 5 years, while it's important to look at that 5th year, it's not necessarily what's going to happen because there's so many things that can change that. I would tell you that where we ended our total expenditures in fiscal 18 is actually about the fiscal 14, fiscal 15 actual expenditures. So we've cut that much and then continued to reduce. So in looking at the current fiscal year, I compare May, what I had projected in May for fiscal 19, and then what we're actually projecting in the current fiscal year. So revenue variances. Real estate is up about $1 million from what I had anticipated. And if we look at, we had the $3 million that was higher in the last fiscal year. The majority of that was actually just a one-time, people paid their taxes sooner than they needed to because the state and local tax credit was going away, so they paid them in December. So a portion of that $3 million is really just a reset. So if you're looking at the actual 5-year forecast, last year we collected about $50 million in real estate revenue. The current fiscal year, I am projecting about $48 million. So it does drop, but it's more than what we collected in fiscal 17, and that's because we also had an increase in TIF payments, and that we found out is ongoing. So we're about $1 million more than what I expected in May, because we were able to find out from the county auditor's office that is ongoing. The next material line is 1.05 property tax allocation. That's increased by $202,860. That is rollback homestead increase. There is always a correlation between your rollback and homestead values anytime your values go up. So when we saw the reappraisal, when we see TIF payments go up, those would go up as well. So that there's an increase in that revenue. All other revenue is increased by $372,599. And that is interest income. We're earning more money. We have more money in the bank. Rates are slightly higher. So investments, although they have to be very conservative, I'm not allowed to invest in a lot of things, but we do have an increase in that. And then we also expanded the all-day kindergarten. And if you remember, for our regular ed students, there's a fee associated with that. So you see an increase here. We also have an increase in staffing because we've had to increase that, but there is the offsetting revenue. And then all other financing sources is increased by $115,190. That's due to a BWC or a workers' comp refund. We never know whether we will or won't get those. So each year, I don't project it in the future years. We might not get it, but we know we got it this year, so I have included it. So about a $1.7 million positive variance on the revenue side for the current fiscal year. And again, the majority of those things would carry forward throughout the years. Then when we look at expenditures for the current fiscal year, personnel is up $442,744. The majority of that is graduate coursework. So our teachers are able to take graduate level courses and move to the right on our salary schedule. And then we also had to hire a special education counselor because of the caseloads.
Apologies.
Sorry, psychologist, because of the workload, the caseload, and there's, laws around what they are and are not allowed to have. So we did have to increase for that. Then benefits is a reduction of $1.1 million. That's the ongoing effect of the changes that we made through the negotiation process. We also did find out last Monday that we are only going to see a 1% premium increase in our health insurance costs, where we had 5 in the forecast previously. So that too is a savings, and that's really driven by just the consumer behavior and how people are using those 2 new plans and really calling around, and a lot of really good stories that we're hearing back from the insurance committee. So that's the biggest driver. The next, material and supplies. Those materials and supplies are pretty much driven by the buildings and departments and the budgets that are turned in. So they would have asked for probably more. If you look at the capital outlay line, it's higher. So they probably asked for more in those lines than they would have in materials and supplies, and that varies year to year. And then we had some additional technology and maintenance expenses in the capital outlay line. Other objects is reduced by $105,191. That's because of the auditor treasurer tax collection fees. So we have to pay the auditor to collect our taxes. Last fiscal year, because we had the increase in the real estate because of the SALT, those fees would be higher. This year, those are down because they're not collecting as much. And then I have increased the transfer outline by $593,000 going to permanent improvement. That's mainly just saying that we know that we're going to continue to spend what we said we would spend. Rather than keeping it in the general fund, we move it over and show that we're actually spending that in that permanent improvement line. So overall, a total reduction in costs so far of $155,641 from May's forecast. So if we look at the revenue and expenses over time, you can see that revenue is not growing a lot, which it never does. We don't expect huge increases in the revenue. It's pretty much set. Once we pass the levy, that's what we collect unless we have new construction, which then resets our real estate value. And then you can see the red line there are our costs that are increasing. That's not going to stop happening. We are trying to reduce as much as possible. We will hit a place where we maybe can't reduce. And so at some point, we will be back on the ballot. But when I look at the forecast now, I don't see that happening until at least November of 2022. Hopefully, when we continue to do these CIP goals of reducing our current year budget, that will flow through and continue to push that out. But you do see the green line is then, the gradual decrease in our ending cash balance. When we look at our ending cash balance versus what a 30-day cash ratio looks like, the orange on that graph is the 30-day mark. We don't go below that until 2023. Again, I believe that once we hit that mark and we get out that far, provided we don't have a lot of crazy changes with the governor, whichever governor, we have next year, or we don't have anything really major happen as far as enrollment and making our expenses, I think that we'll probably get above that 30-day cash ratio even in 2023. The material revenue assumptions in our future years, clearly we just went through the reappraisal with the Franklin County Auditor's Office. In 3 years, we'll have an update. I expect that we'll probably see some increase there, but usually updates are not nearly the same level of increase or decrease as a reappraisal year. So, but I do have some increase in there in that 3rd year for that. House Bill 49 state funding increase. We know that in the current year, we're getting 3.4% more this year than we did last year. We've talked about this probably every year. In the future years, I have 0 increase because we've talked to legislators who don't think that we're going to get any more funding. Do I think that that's exactly how it'll happen? Probably not over the next 4 years. There'll probably be some kind of increase, but I think conservatively, this is not a huge dollar amount for us, and so it just makes sense for us to say 0 until we see. And again, not knowing what whichever person gets in as the governor, what that impact may be. And then income tax sharing and real estate. So as abatements expire, according to their agreements, that value actually rolls back onto the tax duplicate. It is considered new construction, but as those expire, so does the income tax sharing. So in years when we know that we have abatements expiring and we're going to have an increase because of that as new construction in our real estate, then we've dropped the income tax sharing portion of that. But the income tax sharing is still a pretty healthy line for us. Material expenditure assumptions in future years. We do have both plea and our OPSI union negotiated agreements. They expire June 30th of 2020. So everything that is in there that impacts the forecast or expenses is included in the 5-year forecast. And then we have new staffing projections. We hired more folks this year. We hired, I believe it was 13 certified and 5 classified, and then a couple of administrators. In future years, we actually have just 7 certified staff and 4 classified staff and no administrators in the next 4 years. We do look at that as though it's a pot of money. So while we say that it could be 7 teachers, it could be 4 classified, we're looking at the dollar amount. We have from the beginning of time used masters and 4 level to project the cost of the teachers. And our OPSI staff, we use about $30,000 as a salary range because there's such a range between bus drivers versus aides.
Do you factor in potential retirement too into those projections?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have turnover. We also are looking at the severance payment that we'll have to pay out. So we calculate all that. I don't know. So one of the tricky pieces about that is that I only know the experience for the people as long as they've worked for our district. So if I have someone who transfers in, we don't always we don't always give them all that experience. According to the negotiated agreement, we can give them up to 10 years. Well, if they happen to transfer in and they'd had 20 years of experience and we've only given them 10, then I don't know how close to retirement they really are. So it's kind of a guess in that I look at how old are they? When do I think they started in the district? When do I think they started in teaching? And then we also have included in the forecast the health insurance costs so we have 1% in the current year, but then I have 5% in each of the future years. We're still really new to the self-funding portion and then these 2 new insurances to reduce that 5% yet. And the average in school districts is actually closer to about, what did they say at the meeting? 4.2%. So I think that the 5 is a good number, but obviously we're going to continue to watch that. If we continue to have these lower premium increases, then we probably would change those projections going forward. This forecast does include just a small portion of the $627,000 that we were to identify, and that is the difference between the 5% and the 1%. So it's not the entire $1.1 million, it's just that portion that would have been associated with the 5% going to 1%. Overall, based on those 2 revenue and expenditure variances from last year, we did have a 4.3 positive impact over the 4-year period, so through fiscal 22. I only say 4 years there because in May we didn't have 2023. So through fiscal 22, we do begin to spend more than we bring in the current year. So it's really imperative that we continue to find those reductions in the current year. Because if you're looking at the 5-year forecast, the deficit spending is about $365,000 this year, but then you look at line 6.01 in the next year and it jumps up to about, I believe it's around $1 million, and then it compounds from there. So while we are still positive by $3.6 million in the end of that 5th year, I prefer to look at line 6.01 to see what are we spending more than we bring in, at what point do we start to do that, and what is the impact and how quickly does that increase. So things to look at for discussion, the enrollment really is, of all the things that could happen, the enrollment piece is really the piece that concerns me the most. Knowing that we have these condominiums being built, knowing that there are going to be some number of students out there, we need to figure out, how do we figure out how many students are coming from that area? When are they coming? And it's not just teaching staff, it's also they live outside 2 miles. So now I have to transport, which means we'll have to buy buses, we'll have to hire bus drivers. So trying to get a handle on that, and at what point do we feel good about including those kinds of assumptions in this forecast?
So we have 7 teaching personnel and 4 admin in forecast annually.
Or classified.
Or classified.
Forecast, okay.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned in terms of the growth of the district and the unknown, do we have a percentage in there, and maybe it's in here somewhere, that we're expecting? Or
Students,
yes.
yeah, so we have actually the enrollment projection that we use on page 7 of the notes. And it's actually the enrollment projection, the number of students that we have. It's a chart.
Did we know about the condos?
No.
No.
No, we didn't know about the condos, so that wouldn't be part of this.
Yeah.
The other area that is a little bit of a concern, we've talked about the win-win area. And for all other districts that were able to settle with Columbus Public Schools, we're not like those districts, because we still have a good portion of undeveloped land that is in that win-win area in the north part of the district. Most of the other districts that were able to settle with them are completely developed, and so they know that. We're trying to work with the city of New Albany and NACO to find out what is that potential impact. As long as the win-win agreement is in place, we see that really more as an insurance policy. It's about $600,000 payment to Columbus schools, but I also know that area isn't going to be developed, and have a lot of multifamily and bring us a lot more students that we're not prepared for. So we're working with those 2 entities to try to figure out what might be coming, what might that impact be, and then how can we negotiate some kind of an agreement. The problem for Columbus schools, that area, they have no buildings in that area. And so for them to have to bus students from that area, they'd be on the bus for probably about an hour. So it's just a tricky area. It's a tricky, variance to even get our hands around. We do know that a portion of it is a park area. We know that the city is looking at a couple of pieces of those properties that are available in that area, but there's still a good bit of land that could be developed. So it's really the enrollment piece that is impactful here. I would say the staff members that we have in the forecast, I sit in, like I said, with Superintendent Sayers and his staffing meetings. If it's not justified, he won't hire them. And they have to go through a lot of hoops to justify any additional staff that we do hire.
I just want to point out the discussions that we've had with NACO and the city. They've been really good partners in this process of determining what is available and what development looks like. The win-win thing is one thing because it's currently undeveloped, unincorporated land that is actually, because of the agreement, it may sit in our boundaries, but as long as Columbus is growing and developing it, it transfers into Columbus.
Correct.
The situation with the condos that are being built, that was incorporated land already that just happened to be a golf course at the time, or still is currently, but now he started building on it. But because it was incorporated, that comes into our district. And so, but NACO, they put their best effort forward, the city put their best effort forward in trying to work or communicate with that developer to understand what the process was and what he wanted to do. Some people just want to build. And so we didn't have as much control over that situation as we do in other areas. I do want to say that they are being good partners in this process.
They've been fantastic. I mean, even that they're willing to help us try to figure out what the potential in the win-win area that's not developed. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
For them to do that for us. Yeah, they've been fantastic to work with. This other person, I don't know the owner. I just know that we have some condos coming.
And related to the CIP goal, to reduce the budget by 1% again, I know that's got to get more and more challenging for you. Do you and Superintendent Sawyers have an initial plan that you can share, or any thoughts you can share on it?
You want to respond to me too?
What you,
So part of it's through attrition for staff and due diligence, as Becky talked about, through the staffing process for justification. So just because the position vacates doesn't mean it's an autofill. They'll actually go through the justification process to determine, is the position necessary in what form, can it be changed, otherwise modified to better serve the school district or the kids, and what does that look like? So first piece is staffing. Second piece typically happens towards the second half of the school year. So we clearly adopt operational budgets across the school district that include supplies as an example. So Becky and I will watch purchase orders beginning in the second half of the school year, dominantly towards March, April, and try to figure out, based upon what's being requested, can it be consumed in that fiscal year? If it cannot be consumed, it will not be ordered. So we deny the purchase order, which then contributes to cost savings overall for that year, and it becomes a future purchase in the following year. We're still working on utilities, so we try to find cost savings. Can we tweak a temperature by 1 degree here? Can we change overtime on something else? We're looking at how the facilities are being used. So we still track operational expenditures across the school district to try to find additional cost savings. So you're right, it's getting harder because we've done the obvious things. Now it's the daily operational things that have to continue to happen across the school district. But we do pay attention to the budgets. I think people are fairly surprised how much we know about their budget, the money's being spent on, based upon the observations that Becky and I have.
I can tell you at this point in the year, if I look at attrition and I look at budgeted for new hires versus where we spent, we likely could say we've met this goal. However, I never know when that special needs student that's going to come in, and we just actually had one that is a very high need, that has a lot of one-on-one services and additional supports that have to be in place. And some of those students can cost upwards of $85,000, $90,000, $100,000. So where we may think that we're there, we're continually watching to say, am I really there? And then trying to offset when those things happen. Thank you.
Just a minor question. Have we updated the enrollment growth for fiscal 19 to actual? Is that the actual?
You know what? I did not do that on here.
No, it's not the actual.
It's close.
It's close.
And I need to add fiscal 23.
And then that's what's going to be my second
Absent
question.
preschool, we're just about 5,006, so it's not that far off. About 30 students. If you add preschool, it's another 125. But K through 12, as illustrated, it's probably absent 30 kids.
And I need to add fiscal 23 onto this.
Yeah,
too.
the graph
I'll do
needs,
that
I
before.
made a note for Becky that I made the same observation. I think we have to update the chart. I don't think we've seen the other one. I just don't think it's the one that's in this version.
Right.
And with the uncertainty around growth in the district in terms of student numbers, you mentioned earlier, staffing could be a variable expense, transportation a variable expense. What else gives you concern about any other variable expenses, or facilities wise? How do we stack up?
We're actually in fairly decent shape from a facility perspective because of the passage of the PI. So we have a plan in place to deal with capital assets and repairs and replacement. So I don't think we have the concern there. It really goes back to the unknown liability of what's going to come from this condominium development and what portions of it end up being in the New Albany Plain Local School District versus the Westerville City Schools, and then the multifamily apartment housing that's also proposed at that same complex, and which portions of that will be New Albany Plain Local Schools versus Westerville City Schools. So there's two school districts that will be impacted. It just comes down to, it could be a parking lot, honestly, because that happens in a couple places already in our school district that you're familiar with, and an apartment complex that one side of the parking lot is us, the other side of the parking lot is Columbus City. I don't know what his final plan that actually goes through the final phases of development, how that's going to phase out. Are we the condominiums dominantly, which I think will bring a different clientele as far as numbers than the apartment complex. So we're honestly just waiting to get additional information. And fortunately, as Becky said, and John, NACO's been very good in trying to help us get that information so that we can understand the potential enrollment liability to the school district for the new development.
And I would say it's a great question about facilities, because we've been able to transfer money into permanent improvement. I feel a lot better that if something major would happen, we have a little cushion there to help offset that. I'm not as concerned about that as far as the 5-year forecast goes as the staffing.
And we also built in, and Becky said, we maintained the transfer of the general revenue fund beyond what we were currently spending out of PI. So that's still part of the budget. So we're fairly comfortable and confident that we've accounted for those assets as they continue to happen, just because of the planning that's taken place across the school district.
Okay. Regarding building capacity, though, do we know what our capacity is in the current buildings?
Yeah, campus-wide, we're still built for 5,500. So, I mean, we're okay, but we have very large elementary schools compared to other school districts. I mean, the primary is sitting right now around 1,050. The intermediate school is pushing 1,100. Those are very large grade levels, so they're not small. Thus, some of the changes we made this past summer of converting the dean positions to the AP, it's just, honestly, it's the daily volume of having nearly 1,200 kids in a building. It's as big as some high schools in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
It's large.
And I would say even the restructuring that Michael did a couple years ago helps even out the number of students in the building. So there is still some room to kind of grow in each of those buildings. Now, if the area in the north, becomes ours and gets tons of multifamily, that's a completely different, this campus can't. Probably
should not
depending.
deal with the northern corridor of the Win-Win property adjacent to the Metro Parks actually becoming developed. I get Columbus City would love to see that happen and become the New Albany Plain Local School District. We do not want that to happen. It would have a huge impact to the daily operational structures. We could not house the potential number of students that could come in there in multifamily, because that's exactly what Columbus City would do, is multifamily.
Sorry, there's one more question. On the expenditure side, beyond 2020, when the existing negotiated agreements expire, you may have mentioned this. Do you leave that as a static number, or do you have a multiplier that you add for the remaining?
So
3
I
years?
have the step that is 2.5%, because even if we don't have a contract, the one that is in place is the one you'd use. And then I have a 1% base increase built in as planning for just base, which is what I've done since I've been here. We can certainly change that, but it's nominal.
But the forecast does reflect the standardized step that was negotiated. So that does give us the ability of we have a known now versus the unknown.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Board policies, Mr. Sawyers.
Board of Education members, this evening on the board agenda, we have first readings for, it's 18 total policies, but they're grouped into specific categories because there's overlap between the administrative policy, the professional policy, and the non-teaching personnel policy in relationship, as an example, the non-discrimination, equal opportunity employment. So the policies that appear this evening, again, have changes pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, new references to specific terminology. In some cases, it's just vocabulary that's changed based upon the new legislation that came out from the state legislature, have gone through formal review process from Neola with board counsel and are recommended this evening for those updates. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about specific policies, but they're really, all of them are revisions. And just have corrections or changes based upon changes in state statute.
Questions?
Okay, thank you. Next opportunity for public participation with no one. Should I have a motion on superintendent's items A and B?
So moved.
Second.
Kalinowski, Mr. Newmoff, Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you. Superintendent items this evening account for standard employee relation items that occur pursuant to the negotiated agreement. There's a significant section related to salary changes, as Ms. Jenkins alluded to, for the teachers that completed summer coursework for graduate credit that have lane changes based upon either additional graduate credit beyond the lane that they were previously in on the salary schedule, or the attainment of a master's degree moving from a bachelor's. So those appear this evening. In addition to that, we have recommendations for winter supplemental contracts for coaches that have been received from the athletic department, in addition to the volunteer coaches that have also been received from the athletic department. A few updates on non-teaching personnel hirings for this evening, as well as the sixth assignment based upon a change in student enrollment at the high school and the need to offset a class. Beyond that, we have a couple amendments for contracts based upon changes in hours for student needs in the lunchroom. So we've made a recommendation to modify the hours of a classified contract. For letter B this evening for general business, you have action items to approve a senior waiver for a student that's eligible whose parents have moved out of the school district based upon an employment transfer, but for the student to actually be able to finish the school year. An approval for a Meta Solutions natural gas purchase. So we are part of a consortia through Meta for natural gas for competitive bid pricing specifically. So we do award through Meta the lowest responsible bid, and that's actually appearing this evening for approval through Meta that will actually purchase through the co-op for competitive bid for natural gas. And then lastly is the approval of an internship agreement for university relationship. Do you have any questions I can answer?
Did Bowling Green approach us on that?
They did. So we've had success with speech language pathologists for the training because of the shortage in the state of Ohio. So I think it also helps that the person that wants to do the internship is local and it's convenient to the school district. But yes, we were approached by Bowling Green.
Sounds like a win-win.
Especially for speech path.
Yeah.
Because there's a shortage. You can't find them. It's a great career choice for the future for anyone that wants to become a speech pathologist in the school district. There are jobs everywhere.
Any other questions? Then could I have a roll call, please?
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. That brings us to adjournment. So may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Newmoff, Ms. Kalinowski, roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
President McClelland?
Yes. Thank you. We are adjourned. Next meeting is Monday, the 22nd, 5:30.
It is at 5:30
Oh.
because State of
5:30.
the Schools will be at 6:30. So I was going to remind you of that. So 5:30 to 6 will be the board meeting.
Okay. Have we publicized the state of the school? Okay.
It's coming out again as a special message in a text.